So when I was in junior high, and by the way, when I was in junior high, it was 7th and 8th grade. Many areas have 6th, 7th, and 8th as junior high, but for us it was just 7th and 8th. I lived out in a place called Hillsboro during my 6th grade year, and then we moved to Lake Oswego. And I went to the junior high the first year. I was a little bit unique at the time. I started growing my hair in the back a little bit long. I had a rat tail at the time when I entered high school. Yes, a rat tail. God, I haven't seen one of those in a while. So, I believe it was right around the beginning of the second year. And there was a drug and alcohol counselor. She mostly dealt with drugs, which was very interesting coming from a school where it wasn't even an issue, as far as I knew at the time. And she came into the class one day, and I ended up getting this summons or notification that they were recommending that I join this class. So each day, I don't recall if it was once a week or every day for a week. I don't remember back exactly how many times I went. But what it was a drug education class for people they thought might be using drugs or have the potential to use drugs. Now, my father drank beer once in a while, alcohol sometimes, but very rarely. He wasn't an alcoholic by any means. Both of my parents smoked cannabis regularly, every day, for my whole upbringing. But I knew nothing of it. It's true that kids don't often pay attention to these things when they're going on around them, or even care. It wasn't an issue. It's just like smoking a cigarette or anything else. But it's not like they sat and smoked it in front of me. So, even with that and being exposed to that, I had never even thought about consuming alcohol or cannabis or anything else. I was a straight edge skateboarder. I didn't want caffeine. Well, there was a time when we discovered no-dose pills, which are took a few too many of those and got a little shaky, but we wanted an energy boost because we were skaters. But we didn't use drugs. And I went to this class, and the first guy I met was, I think his name was, it's funny because he's still around. I don't recall his name at the moment. He had the stoner eyes, he was tall, he had a mullet, and there were several other people in this class too. So she started telling us and teaching us about all these drugs. Now, I haven't thought about this much since then, but the video I just made about the past and popularity and whatnot is what it kind of reminded me of this. And I thought it was important because after talking with the guys in the class, I learned a lot about drugs. And it wasn't even a year later, I think, when my freshman year of high school, when this friend of mine, Alex, she gave me a little baggie with some cannabis in it for my birthday. I believe it was probably my 14th or 15th birthday maybe. And I took it home and I tried it and didn't really have any effect. And then down the line I tried it again and it did. But that's all history. I'm not here to talk about my use of substances. But the moment where I was made aware of it to the extent that I was curious. And I guess the point I'd like to make here is that class did absolutely nothing to educate me on why I shouldn't try these things. When they're showing Reefer Madness films, old reel to reel. I mean, everything was on reels back then. So these are projector films from like the 60s and 70s. Even as a kid, you can see this is ridiculous, outdated information. And one might think this has changed. But let me fast forward about 20 years. It was about a decade ago, and I got in trouble for having possession of a few psychedelic mushrooms. And I ended up going on probation for a couple of years, and part of the conditions of my probation was that I had to take a drug education class. Now, I went for an assessment, and I insisted I shouldn't have to take a diversion or anything. I said, These are psychedelics. I was not caught with any heavy substance, okay? They said, okay, here's what you have to do. You have to go to this class. I believe it was once or twice a week. I think there were like 8 of them. I went to this, and it's a privately owned group, right? A privately owned building that with a mother who runs this education thing. Basically, the state funds them, and then they are supposed to educate you on why not to use substances and the dangers it causes and why you shouldn't drink and drive and everything else you can imagine. So here I am, the only stoner kid in this class with people with PCP and heroin and meth. Once again, this is the second time I've been in a class like this forced by the courts. And the first time was no different. The first time, neither one of the counselors had ever used drugs. There was a husband and wife team, and they'd come in and they had no clue. They'd never touched a substance. But the minute we went on break, they both ran outside and smoked 10 cigarettes as quick as they could. I mean, I'm not even kidding. It was like, so, yeah. So anyhow, this next time I went, it was just this little class. It was like a few hours, several times, a couple times a week. I don't recall. I went in there, and this kid, basically the mom is the one that owns it. She lets her son run it, who was some 18-year-old punk who used drugs for a while and then quit. I remember he'd put on these films, and he'd just sit back, put his feet up on the table, and just sit there on his iPhone the whole time. Clueless, knew nothing about these substances. And most people just wanted this class to be over with. But I remembered my past and the poor education I'd got. And I looked around at these people in this room and said, a lot of these people are going to have serious problems in their lives. And having an education on these things, this might be the only one they get. Because a lot of people didn't have the benefit of even the time or inkling to research these things. I was always researching substances, what they do to the body and the mind and how they interact, because I wanted to know if I'm going to consume something. But seeing how many people were learning nothing from this class, I spoke up. The guy had played a video, and it was an old 60s video about cannabis, and he asked afterwards what people thought. And I said, I think it's complete bullshit. And he gave me the impression that, well, you want to finish this class, right? You don't want to have to come back for another one. I'm like, look, I'm just giving you my honest opinion. The things that were said in that about brain damage being done by THC are completely unfounded. And I went on and I listed all the things that were wrong with what he was presenting. And he basically just laughed me off, of course, and said, tough shit, this is the class. So I finished the class, got my certificate, finished my probation, and went on with my life. And I really haven't thought about it since. But I remember one point in there when we were talking about cannabis, and he was talking about how harmful and dangerous it is, and just this kid that has no clue. And I looked at him and I said, well, most people disagree, and the science disagrees. And I said, I'll guarantee you this. In the next decade, cannabis will be legal for purchase. And he said, hell no, never. He said, mark my words, cannabis will never be legalized. I think it was the next year it was legalized for medicinal, and then it was, several years later it was made recreational. And naturally there's a point where you just want to drive back down and see if the guy's still there and be like, I'm not like that. It's a joke, but it's not an I told you so thing. It's more of an, look, society thinks differently than the system, which is supposed to protect people from getting caught up in the drug world. That the treatment centers are a completely different story, and that needs to be talked about. I really need to have a discussion, and it's a whole chapter in the book I'm writing about the pharmaceutical issues that we have, trying to give weight to the benefit of medicine and the risks as well. Sure, some people, Suboxone works great for coming off of opiates, but for others, they just become addicted to Suboxone, especially if they're given it even when they weren't even addicted to something else. Strong shit, right? There's endless information that we can learn about these things. It's very frustrating that the system that's supposed to help rehabilitate people, not just the education part, which is completely broken, way off track, no new science. They're just a lost cause. But this is also continues into drug and alcohol rehabilitation centers, which are some of the most corrupt outfits in this whole country. These agencies are funded by the state. Now, you want to talk about Florida, it's the most corrupt treatment centers are down there because their laws are very lax. So a lot of people say, oh, we're going to send somebody to treatment. Oh, they've got this great center in Florida. And as I said, it happened to my niece, who died at 23 the year before last from an overdose because there was no maintenance, because they let her out of jail without a program early, without any oversight. The education was poor. The planning is poor for the way that they do these things. But the treatment centers, half of them don't even care about getting people well. And I know that sounds like a bold statement, maybe not half, but many of them are just basically their own forms of, the opposite of a pill mill. It's a human mill. They will let people come in and then they'll put them up in motels or something like that, and they'll pay, for them to do whatever they can do whatever they want. All they want is the money from the state. They'll sign people up for classes they don't need, have AA like every single day several times because every class they get paid for. In other words, these programs are designed to make money. They're not designed to help people. And this is where it gets very complicated. See, we're letting the state dictate what punishments and what treatments we should have. But then we're letting the private, market dictate exactly how to deal with that. It's just like you go to, going to the pharmaceutical industry. Do you nationalize it? Do you make it a public, public funded thing? I mean, our tax dollars are all ready to go to pay for a lot of these things, is my point. Many of our tax dollars pay for, research, vaccines, all different types of medicines. And at the same time, we have to pay for it twice. And then you go to treatment, and I'm sure that many of you are already aware of this, but if you're not, you should know how much a drug treatment actually costs, because it is exorbitant. It is preposterous. This place, Malibu or whatever, I mean, we're talking like hundreds of thousands of dollars to stay there for any period of time. It is a fortune. Sure. And let me just leave you on this note. Treatment centers work for some people. For most, it's not the treatment center. That's a reprieve, and they come right back to their old life. The reason being is this. The tools aren't being taught to actually cope. You're putting a person in an absolutely beautiful, luxurious hotel on the beach with swimming pools and yoga and all these programs. And that's phenomenal, because at that moment you get there, you're emotionally charged because of the experience and the novelty of being in a new place, as well as the promise of a whole group of people who want to do what you want to do. But the minute you leave that, you go back to your life. And if there's no extended care and ongoing, it's kind of like when you have a sponsor in AA. You don't just go to AA and then that's it. It's something that people continue doing. And addiction, unfortunately, usually related to opiates, heroin, but also, cocaine and amphetamines, it's a serious issue in this country. And the reason, partially, why it's so bad is because of the poor way that we do deal with those who do need help. And it all goes back to this, taking a kid out of his class and insisting he join in a drug class by stereotyping them because of what they look like, how they dress. And this is exactly what happens with the police a lot of the times, as people are singled out because of the way they look. Yes, they might be in possession of drugs, but is arresting them going to do anything better for the system, where we're paying more money for them to be in jail, and the minute they get back out, they're right where they were? These problems are not solved by punishment, and they're not solved by 60-year-old films being shown to kids. Thanks for listening. Let me know your input, and I'll be continuing this discussion about treatment centers in the future once I complete my project. So, thank you to my patrons. Thank you to my viewers. Make sure to leave a comment. And I'm not going to tell you to hit the like button, but you should. It helps me out. Talk to you all next time. Be well.